This is the Rhineland city of Cologne, spring 1930. Brisk commerce from France and Belgium and Holland, from the rich Rhineland cities, was flowing through its mammoth station and past it on the river. Cologne was the thriving gateway to Germany, a busy, useful city of 750,000 Germans just beginning to recover from their First World War. That was 15 years ago. A couple of years before this sweating Caesar was voted into power with his high promises, some of which history proved bitterly true. For as spring came to the Rhine in 1945, this was Cologne under Hitler. There was no city anymore. History had run over it with the weight of the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. First Army and left this hollow collection of rubble and stone as testament. Germany had brought this to herself. This is defeat in modern war. The sound of ruin is silence. The smell of ruin is sick with the scent of dead and dust. And it is no longer a city. Like 100 other ruined German cities, its sidewalks and streets are stone piles. Car tracks and street lamps and buses are twisted and grotesque. The homes and the people in the homes are gone. There are no theaters or restaurants or banks or stores. No light, no sewers, no water, no phone, no city as we know a city. There is only destruction by war. But this is a story of the rebuilding of that city from its rubble. These are the men who came to do it, soldiers of MG, G5, the American military government, to whom has fallen the battle of the peace. And as the stars and stripes go up, this is the first beginning of that vast occupation army which is clearing up the rubble of a nation today. The men whose dirty, thankless job it is to build a city out of chaos, and do it quickly and with justice to its citizens. Colonel and lieutenant and PFC alike, they are engineers and lawyers, clerks and cops, specially trained to know this city and how it once worked. They're soldiers for the battle of the peace. Their job is tough because it's more than a physical rebuilding of a ruined place. It's here, too, in the people. In weary files, the citizens who'd fought a war to win the world come home across American bridges. And MG must take responsibility for their life. A bum life, which needs a first-class overhaul. The Germans listen respectfully, as Germans would, while an MG announcer gives them their first American orders. They look like any well-fed people in a city street. They're not. They're German. Inside, they're sick and bitter over another German war they didn't win. And to a people like these, it's MG's job to show the way to a democratic kind of life. It was a double job, the city and its German people. And Germans had been infected a long, long time. DDT killed lice on the bodies of Germans, all of whom MG had ordered to take the treatment. DDT stopped a sweeping typhus epidemic. But it was just one part of the double job. The powder couldn't reach their minds and kill out the infection of their former life. Here's a German with that infection burned into his arm. That's the blood type mark, used only for SS men, tattooed on his skin for life, as his SS ideas are in his brain for life. He is incurable. It was to catch men like him that MG ordered each German to be stopped and asked for papers. The penalty for not reporting in for screening within 24 hours was severe. In long columns, the new arrivals waited on the streets for interviews. And it would be from them, the fat ones or the thin ones, the butcher and the brewmaster, that MG would have to choose the men who would rebuild and run their ruined city. Confirmed and dangerous Nazis mixed in the crowd. They had to. Side by side with them stood anti-Nazis coming home from exile. And as the MG questionnaires were filled out, the questions asked and answered, it became apparent that some of the most vicious of them had once been key men in the city. Some of the best were inexperienced. It would be the skill and honesty of MG in weeding out the bad right here, which would determine whether Germany would ever go to war again or not. The responsibility was heavy. What Nazi organizations did you join, mein Herr? What's been your source of income, mein Frau? Did you fight the Nazis? If so, how? The job was tough and the Germans cynical. But very slowly, in the swelling files, trustworthy records began to show up. And from them, MG selected its first police force. Here, an MG interpreter explains its basic functions. Policing the broken streets from looting, from sabotage. And MG's first emblems of trust went out to Germans of Cologne. Armbands for the vanguard of the Germans who would work our way against the Nazi infection. There were others, many others. This distinguished-looking German had been head of the Prussian Senate, famous as a city planner and as a foe of fascism. Yes, there were decent Germans to help MG. Germans to guide other Germans to democratic life. It was the beginning of the peace. As the old went out, in came the new. The end of lies, the beginning of truth. The end of tyranny, the beginnings of a new chance. These were MG's terms of conquest. The rules were tough. They had to be, or the job was tough. And then the job began. There was still no city of Cologne. The hollow buildings menaced Germans and Americans alike. MG's newly restaffed fire department helped, as down they came one by one, until the ruin of the city was complete, and building could begin again, stone by stone. It was a dirty job, those first months of cleaning up, so MG gave the dirty work to Germans used to dirty work, the Nazis. For the Nazis, whether banker, lawyer, government official, or party gangster, could not be trusted with any other type of work. So this was their job. No matter how much they whined, they couldn't do it. It was MG's double overhaul, the city and the people. MG made it clear to Nazi gripers that if they didn't work, they didn't eat. For one of the most crucial problems of the wrecked city was food. Already 150,000 Germans had come back, and what food came in wasn't enough to feed 30,000. MG's job was not to feed them. It was merely to make sure it was distributed and kept from the black markets. MG told the Germans, feed yourself. And Germans did. They had to. Young Germans and old ones, girls and their grandmothers went to work in the fields outside the city. The era of starving other nations to feed Germany was gone. The era of using Polish, Russian, Serbian, and French men and women as slaves in the fields was gone. Some of the former slaves weren't gone, and the MG ration system obliged Germans to feed the displaced persons free. It used the same points the Germans had used in Nazi times, but instead of feeding Nazis first, it fed them last. Instead of feeding anti-Nazis last or not at all, it fed them first. The points would bring little. There was little food, and first priority went to the sick and wounded in the hospitals. This big new building had been Cologne's best hospital, assigned by MG to take care of allied wounded. This one, second least harmed by battle, went to displaced persons, to all whom the Nazis tortured and enslaved or starved, like this Polish woman. The other hospitals, bombed and wrecked, went to sick German citizens, and MG ordered them to isolate their typhus cases in them quickly. MG had no medical supplies to spare the Germans, hardly enough for the anti-Nazi sick, so the wrecked drugstores of the city were stripped, under strict MG supervision, for drugs and medicines with which Germans could minister unto themselves. Slowly and painfully, Cologne was beginning to be a city again. One by one, as MG directed, the citizens brought its 1,000,001 functions slowly back to operation. One by one, the water mains and sewer pipes and power cables and communication systems and streetcar tracks began to operate again, as the Germans repaired the devastation which their war had brought to them. This had been a submarine cable underneath the Rhine, hidden from MG by Nazis, but revealed by the new Germans, the Germans willing to accept our peace. Above the ground, the twisted poles and broken wires which had been blasted out of service were patched and repaired so the city could have light. And though only Allied officials could use the phone, the switchboards were rewired and put to work with German operators. From the mines beyond Cologne, coal began to come again. But its destination was not German homes and stoves, for there was just enough coal coming from the earth to feed the giant generators of the city. Coal for generators which supplied power to nearby Holland and Belgium, and paid back a tiny amount of Germany's huge war debt to those nations. These are coal briquettes for furnaces, a fraction of what was needed, but all there was. In and beyond the city was the desperate snarl of transportation. The few engines and freight cars not wrecked were overtaxed beyond belief, and shipping on the river helped but little. MG's airtight priority system had to be set up and enforced to move the endless supplies the city needed. Even worse were the nutty problems of finance. Here, a banker from Wisconsin explained MG policy to a group of pre-Hitler bankers from Cologne. Black markets, price control, the occupation mark, inflation. As trusted Germans dug German cash from the ruined vaults, MG's job in finance was just beginning too. Physically, MG's first steps in recreating a city had begun all at once, all together. As the Nazis cleared away the rubble here, the streetcar line began to work again there. And elsewhere, a baker found new flour to make his bread. Slow, tedious, unimpressive work. But as each edition of the Army's German-language newspaper hit the street, it talked of the rebuilding life of the city, the things inside the Germans, the other part of MG's double job. 500,000 Germans read it every day. Though they suspected it as propaganda, they could look around and see what it talked about, see what the propaganda meant, see what MG had already done. They could see Corpus Christi celebrated in front of their exquisite cathedral for the first time in 14 years. MG's doing. The Battle of the Peace. They could see Jewish people standing again in their temples. Buildings ruined not by war, but by the Nazis. They could see human beings raised again to honor and citizenship and freedom of religion under God. The things Americans had died in battle to bring back. The things MG was bringing back. The Battle of the Peace. They could see a new marble monument in a Cologne park, a monument to German dead. It was to German heroes of this war, and the inscription which they read ran like this. This is to commemorate Germany's most shameful years, 1933 to 1945. The heroes were Germans killed by Nazis in Belsen concentration camp. And their heroism had been believing against fascism and war. In dedication and in shame before it stood the Germans of tomorrow, some still in the garb of concentration camps. They were Germans who knew Germany's shame, who wanted the chance MG offered them to earn their future and wipe out the remnants of that shame. It was those remnants which MG's open courts were vigorously prosecuting. Any and all Germans who even slightly stood in the path of the rebuilding of the city. That was part of the overhaul. Behind the bench were 3 MG officers, American lawyers. Before them every day came the parade of black marketers, Nazi diehards, petty crooks, the Germans who sabotaged the peace. This day the German had been caught packing a gun. This gun, an Army Luger. This is the German sweating out a phony alibi. These are his lawyers, whom MG permitted to practice in its courts, provided they had never been Nazis. Here, the interpreter was a German who'd come to America when the Nazis took over Germany. Part of the procedure was the rule that testimony and the statements of the judges must be translated, so the audience can hear and understand that justice, unlike Nazi law, can be just as well as tough. Now a U.S. citizen, the sergeant is helping show this to Nazis he had hated. The verdict was guilty, the sentence hard. Germans convicted in the courts were sent here, the grimmest building in the city. This is Klingelputz, the forbidding former Gestapo prison and torture house, curiously untouched by war. But as MG's prisoners climbed down in front of Klingelputz, suddenly the immensity of MG's job in this or any German city is symbolized by another prisoner, a cocky little Aryan Superman. Like thousands of his countrymen, he was still infected. That's the point. He wasn't even being hypocritical or trying to pretend that he was cured. He showed off, still a two-bit big shot in his own mind, even here in prison under MG guard, and with a decent, respected German questioning him. He was still a Nazi, and always would be. Suppose MG hadn't caught him and kicked him into jail, and instead he and his kind were free to wander through the city, working their cynicism against the future of these German kids. Suppose that instead of this MG welfare center, nothing stood as sentinel against filling these little towheads full of Nazi arrogance again, and the rumbling of German war drums for revenge. Then we would lose the battle of the peace, not only in this city and its people, but in the world. For it's here, with German children who are too young to remember, sitting in the sun, that you can hear the sound of German future and the future of us all. The dirty rubble of defeat, the aftermath of a war their German parents brought them. These German boys had two things burning brightly in their future. One, it is they who will inherit the day of the atomic bomb, when another war would end the world. Two, in the bonfires MG has started for them, to burn out the infection of their past, lies their only chance. It's MG's fight to the finish. It's MG's battle of the peace. Without it, would the war be finally won?